man at his birth is supple and tender, but in death he is rigid and hard. Thus, suppleness and tenderness accompany life, but rigidity and hardness accompany death. I was quoting Lao Tzu. The philosophy of the strength of weakness. You know, it's a strange thing how I think men in the West, and particularly men in the United States, don't realize how much softness is strength. One of old Lao Tzu's favorite analogies was water. And he spoke of water as the weakest of all things in the world. And yet there is nothing to be compared with it in overcoming what is hard and strong. You know, you can cut water with a knife. It lets the knife go right through, but when the knife is withdrawn, there's not even the trace of a wound. And Lao Tzu also said that while being a man, one should retain a certain essential feminine element, and he who does this will become a channel for the whole world. The ideal of the 100% tough guy, the rigid, rugged fellow with muscles like rocks, is really a weakness. Probably we assume this sort of tough exterior as a hard shell to protect ourselves not so much from the outside as from fear of weakness on the inside. What happens if an engineer builds a completely rigid bridge? If, for example, the Golden Gate or the George Washington bridges didn't sway in the wind, if they had no give, no yielding, they'd come crashing down. And so you can always be sure that when a man pretends to be 100% man, he's in doubt of his manhood. If he can allow himself to be weak, he can allow himself what is really the greatest strength not only of human beings, but of all living things. And so it is upon the philosophy of the strength of weakness that came from China to Japan through the migration of Zen Buddhism, that there has largely been inspired one of the most astonishing forms of self-defense that the world knows, what is called judo, or perhaps more popularly, jujitsu. The word judo is fascinating because it means ju, the gentle, do, way. Do is the Japanese way of pronouncing the Chinese Tao. And so it is the gentle Tao, the philosophy of the Tao as applied to self-defense. Now, this philosophy has various components. And one of the most basic things to the whole practice of judo is an understanding of balance. Balance, indeed, is a fundamental idea in Taoist philosophy, because, as I've pointed out from time to time in these programs, the philosophy of the Tao has a basic respect for the balance of nature. You don't upset that balance. You try to find out what it is and go along with it. In other words, you avoid such mistakes as wholesale slaughter of an insect pest, or introducing rabbits into a country like Australia without thought as to whether the rabbit has a natural enemy. And through such interferences with the balance of nature, you find yourself in trouble. So the philosophy of balance, respect for balance, is number one thing that all students of judo have to learn. And sometimes this is illustrated with a ball. You see, Wherever I push it, the ball yields. But the ball never loses its balance. It's the safest form in the world. Completely contained and never off-center. And thus to be completely contained, never able to be put off-center, never fazed by anything. This is what is aimed at in Zen. Now, if we look at these principles of judo, the problem of balance is easily demonstrated with the question of lifting a heavy roll of material. We would be foolish to try and just pick it up like this, because that shows no understanding of the laws of balance. If you want to lift such a thing, you go below its center of gravity, put your shoulder to it, and you see undermine it, and so lift it. And that principle goes throughout judo. Also involved as part of the understanding of balance in judo is to learn to walk in such a way that you're never off-center. That is to say, your feet, your legs rather, form a triangle and your body is on the apex of it. And when you turn, you always try and keep your feet approximately underneath your shoulders. And in this way, you're never off balance. Now then, the second principle, beyond keeping balance and understanding balance, is not to oppose strength to strength. When one is attacked by the enemy, you do not oppose him. You yield to him just like the ball, and you use his strength and the principle of balance to bring about his downfall. Supposing, for example, there is a blow coming at me from this direction. Instead of defending oneself and pushing the blow off, the idea in judo is to carry the blow this way. The knee goes out below the adversary's point of balance, and he goes bang on his own initiative, and you're cunning. The same attitude of, as it were, relaxed gentleness is most beautifully seen, for instance, in watching cats. When a cat falls off a tree, the cat lets go of itself. The cat becomes completely relaxed and lands on the ground with a heavy thud. And thus, if, for example, a cat were about to fall off a tree and suddenly make up its mind that it didn't want to fall at all and go all tense like this, you know, it would land and be just a bag of broken bones when it hit the ground. And so in the same way, it's the philosophy of Zen that we are all falling off a tree. That is to say, the moment we were born, we were kicked off a precipice. And we're falling, and there's nothing that can stop it. And so instead of going into a state of tension all the time and clinging to all sorts of things which are actually falling with us because the whole world is impermanent, be like a cat. And so this cat-like attitude to falling is all through judo. If I, for example, fall straight forward, I learn to land like a cat. No trouble. So in a way, this is the philosophy which is illustrated in a Zen poem which says, "While living, be a dead man, thoroughly dead. And then whatever you do, just as you will be right." It's again what I called in the last program the backwards law, the law of paradox, that In one sense, the more dead you become, the more alive you become. The more soft you become, the stronger you become. Because this is the principle of bend and survive. It's illustrated by the image of the pine tree and the willow. In the snow, the pine tree's trunk stands rigid, and the snow piles up and piles up and piles up. The branch doesn't give, and finally, crack, and it's done for. But the willow, as soon as a little snow accumulates on the branch, down it goes. The snow falls off, and the branch springs up again. So this isn't quite the idea of limpness. It's not softness in the sense of being just limp and flaccid, but of being springy, of having give. And thus, in this way, you might say that judo would turn around our ordinary proverb, necessity is the mother of invention, and say, laziness is the mother of invention. How to achieve what you want to achieve by the easiest possible way, by letting go. And this, after all, is the height of intelligence.